Welcome back to the show. Today, we're going to ancient India, specifically the Gupta era,
Yeah.
around 320 to 550 CE. I think most people have heard of the Guptas. It's known as like a golden age. But we're going to take a deep dive into like what really fueled this cultural explosion. What was going on?
Well, what's really interesting is that the Gupta era,
Yeah.
it wasn't just, magnificent temples and intricate sculptures.
Right.
It was a period where Sanskrit literature just totally blossomed.
Okay.
And it influenced everything from philosophy and everyday life.
So we're talking about more than just like religious texts.
Right.
Right.
Absolutely. Think epic poems,
Okay.
plays that rival Shakespeare in their complexity,
Wow.
and philosophical treatises that are grappling with the very nature of reality.
Oh, wow.
These works weren't just confined to scholars.
Right.
They were performed and recited and debated in public spaces.
Public spaces, like really?
Yeah, and so they really became part of the cultural fabric of the time.
Okay, I got you. Yeah. But before we go too far into this, I'm curious about the backdrop.
Yeah.
What led to this surge in literary creativity? What was going on?
Well, imagine India before massive empires, like the Mauryas and the Guptas.
Right.
There were these smaller nomadic groups
Okay.
called the Mahajanapadas, and they roamed the land. And this period was a time of tremendous change.
Okay.
Agriculture took root, leading to settled communities,
Right.
increased populations, and eventually the rise of these powerful kingdoms.
So these Mahajanapadas, they weren't just like scattered tribes. They were something like more organized.
Yeah.
And they were like laying the foundation for like those later empires.
That's a great question. They were kind of unique in their own way, experimenting with different forms of governance.
Okay.
Some were republics, others were monarchies.
Okay.
But the key point is, as these societies transition from this nomadic lifestyle to settled kingdoms,
Right.
they needed new ways to manage resources, maintain order, and even legitimize their rule.
That sounds like a recipe for both innovation and conflict.
It was.
Did this societal upheaval directly influence the literature of the time?
Absolutely. It's during this transition
Right.
that we see the Vedas, these ancient Hindu texts,
Right.
being composed. The Vedas are complex and multifaceted,
Right.
but one key takeaway from them is this emphasis on Dharma,
Or,
which is cosmic duty,
Mm.
and karma,
okay.
action and consequence.
Karma.
Exactly.
I've heard of karma.
These weren't just abstract ideas, though.
Okay.
They just, permeated everything,
Right.
influencing social order, political decisions, even the arts.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how did these concepts like actually manifest in like their laws or their social customs? Can you give some examples?
One example is the Arthashastra.
The what?
It's a political treatise from this period,
Okay.
and it basically outlines how a just ruler should govern based on Dharma, emphasizing things like fair taxation, just laws,
Right.
and the welfare of the people. It even provides detailed instructions on diplomacy,
Oh, wow.
warfare, and even espionage.
Espionage.
Really? Yeah, all viewed through the lens of Dharma.
Oh, okay. So even something like warfare
Mm-hmm.
had to be conducted ethically. That's pretty interesting.
Exactly. It was a very different approach from the might makes right approach
Yeah.
that we often associate with ancient rulers.
Right.
And this ethical framework, this idea of righteous conduct, even in war,
Right.
finds its way into the literature of the time. The epic Mahabharata, for example,
Right.
isn't just a tale of warring kingdoms.
Right.
It's a philosophical exploration of dharma, duty,
Right.
and the consequences of choices.
Yeah. It's interesting that the Mahabharata is it's an epic story,
It is.
but it's also this philosophical exploration of all of these ideas.
Right, and it reflects the broader societal changes that were happening.
Yeah. Yeah. So were the Vedas like the only influence?
It was influential, but it wasn't the only game in town during this era.
Okay.
You also witnessed the rise of Jainism and Buddhism,
Okay.
both of them offering alternative paths to spiritual liberation
Okay.
and challenging some of the Vedic ideas.
So you have like this dynamic interplay
Yes.
of different philosophical and religious ideas,
Yes.
all kind of contributing to this like
Exactly.
vibrant intellectual landscape.
Right. It was a very fertile time for new ideas.
Were all of the Mahajanapadas equally open to these new religions, or were some like more resistant to change?
It varied. Some kingdoms were definitely more tolerant than others.
Okay.
Some even became patrons of these new religions.
Fine.
This diversity of thought is really crucial because it fostered debate, challenged existing norms,
Right.
and ultimately enriched the intellectual environment from which Gupta literature emerged.
Yeah. So you have this intellectual ferment,
Exactly.
this like clash of ideas. You know, it must pushed writers and thinkers to like refine their arguments and like explore new perspectives.
Absolutely. That's exactly what happened. They had to think more deeply.
Yeah, to create more compelling and insightful works.
Exactly. And this wasn't just limited to religious or philosophical texts.
Right.
This intellectual energy infused all forms of literature.
Really?
From poetry to drama.
Oh, okay. So speaking of drama, wasn't the Gupta era like known for its theatrical productions?
You're absolutely right. This is where we see Sanskrit drama truly flourishing.
Wow. So how did that work?
Playwrights like Kalidasa, considered the Shakespeare of India,
Oh, really?
created works that were complex,
Okay.
emotionally resonant,
Right.
and tackled a wide range of human experiences.
Wow. What made Kalidasa so special?
His works are remarkable for their poetic language, their intricate plots, and nuanced characters.
Okay.
His most famous play, Abhinanashakuntalam, is a love story with a touch of the supernatural,
Okay.
exploring themes of love, loss, duty, and destiny.
Wow. That sounds really interesting.
And these plays were performed for all sorts of audiences.
Really?
From royalty to commoners.
Oh, wow.
Often in these beautiful open-air theaters or courtyards.
So it wasn't just like highbrow entertainment.
No.
It was like
It was for everyone.
a form of storytelling that resonated with people from all walks of life.
Exactly.
I'm curious about like the content though.
Yeah.
Did these plays ever like challenge social norms or like critique those in power?
That's a great question, and the answer is yes.
Really?
Sometimes subtly, sometimes more directly.
Okay.
You could take Kalidasa's play, Malavi Kagnamitram.
Okay.
It's a romantic comedy set in a royal court.
Oh, okay.
But it subtly critiques the excesses of power
Right.
and the limitations placed on women in society.
Oh, wow. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
So even amidst the entertainment, there's this like underlying current of social commentary.
Exactly.
This willingness to like engage with the complexities of their world.
Precisely.
Right. And that reflects like a broader trend
It does.
in Gupta literature.
Yeah.
This desire to explore
Yeah.
not just like the grand narratives of like gods and heroes, but also the everyday experiences of like ordinary people.
Right.
Their joys and their sorrows.
Yes.
And the challenges they face.
It's capturing the human experience.
Okay, so we've talked about the Vedas, the rise of new religions, and
Yeah.
it's like flourishing of drama.
Right.
But what about those philosophical treatises you mentioned earlier?
Oh, yeah.
What were those about?
Well, they delved into some pretty profound questions.
Yeah.
Think about like the nature of reality, the self, consciousness, the meaning of life.
Right, the big questions.
Yeah, those big existential questions that have, captivated thinkers for centuries. One key development during this period was the rise of Vedanta.
Vedanta.
Yeah,
That sounds familiar.
it does.
Give me like a refresher.
Okay.
What's the gist of it?
Vedanta, which literally means end of the Vedas,
Okay.
is a school of Hindu philosophy
Okay.
that draws from the Upanishads.
The Upanishads.
Yeah, those philosophical texts
That's that.
embedded within the Vedas.
Okay.
It's all about understanding the ultimate nature of reality
Okay.
and the relationship between the individual soul and the ultimate reality, often referred to as Brahman.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're getting into like deep
Definitely.
metaphysical territory here.
Right.
How did these Vedanta philosophers like approach these questions? Were there like key figures or schools of thought that like stand out?
There were several prominent figures, each offering their own interpretations.
Okay.
One key debate was about the nature of this ultimate reality, Brahman.
Okay.
Some, like Shankara, argued that Brahman is the only true reality. And everything else, including our individual selves,
Yes.
is ultimately an illusion.
Wow. Oh.
Others, like Ramanuja,
Okay.
proposed a more qualified non-dualism, suggesting that while Brahman is the ultimate ground of reality, individual souls retain a distinct existence.
Okay, so you have these like debates about the nature of reality, the self, the divine.
Yeah.
Were these ideas just debated among philosophers? Or did they have a wider impact?
That's a key point. These philosophical ideas weren't confined to ivory towers.
Okay.
They trickled down into society, influencing religious practices, ethical frameworks, and even artistic expressions.
Okay.
Think about the intricate temple carvings of the Gupta era.
Okay.
They weren't just decorative.
Right.
They often reflected these complex philosophical ideas about the nature of the divine and the cosmos.
So these philosophical debates weren't just abstract exercises.
Yeah.
They were like shaping how people understood the world.
Yeah.
And their place within it. I'm sensing a theme here.
Yeah.
This fusion of like intellectual depth and artistic expression.
You're spot on. To understand this fusion,
Okay.
we really need to delve into another genre of Sanskrit literature
Okay.
that flourished during this period. Poetry.
Poetry.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm all ears. What kind of poetry were they writing?
Think about the transition
Yeah.
from the rigidity of earlier Vedic hymns
Right.
to a more expressive, emotionally resonant style.
Okay.
The Gupta era witnessed an explosion of diverse poetic forms,
Okay.
from ornate courtly poetry to simpler, more nature-inspired verses.
So they paint a picture for me. Like, what were some of the key themes that they were exploring in their poetry?
Love,
Remember.
nature, longing, the beauty of the seasons, and even the erotic.
Okay.
These were all prominent themes that were explored with remarkable sensitivity
Yeah.
and lyrical beauty. One of the most celebrated poets of this era was Kalidasa.
Kalidasa, he wrote plays too.
He did. As we discussed earlier, he was also a master playwright. His epic poem, Meghaduta, or The Cloud Messenger, is a masterpiece of lyrical poetry.
Okay.
It's a tale of love and longing, narrated through the journey of a cloud.
A cloud is a messenger.
Yeah.
That's pretty creative. What's the story about?
It's about a yaksha, a nature spirit who's been exiled from his beloved.
Okay.
He spots a cloud and asks it to carry a message of love and longing to his wife in the Himalayan mountains. The poem beautifully describes the cloud's journey, the landscapes it passes over, and the yaksha's heartfelt message.
Right.
Blending nature imagery with deep human emotion.
Yeah, that's the perfect fusion of those two elements, like the natural world and the depths of human experience.
Exactly. And this sensibility, this ability to find the profound in the everyday, the universal in the particular, it just permeates Gupta poetry. It's really a testament to their artistic skill and their deep understanding of human nature.
So we've got these like epic poems exploring love and longing.
Yeah.
Philosophical treatises, grappling with the nature of reality, and plays that entertain while like subtly challenging social norms.
Yeah.
I'm starting to see why the Gupta era is considered like such a golden age.
Yeah.
But was it like all just about like intellectual and artistic pursuits?
It was a multifaceted society.
What about the like everyday lives of people? Did they have access to this like rich cultural world?
That's a crucial question because the flourishing of Sanskrit literature wasn't just confined to elite circles.
Okay.
It permeated society in various ways. Public readings, performances, and even debates on philosophical topics were common occurrences.
Really?
Yeah. And this made knowledge and artistic expression accessible to a wider audience.
That's really interesting. So you have this vibrant cultural scene.
It was.
Where ideas and stories are shared and debated in public spaces.
Absolutely.
That's pretty different from like the image of like ancient societies as like rigid and hierarchical.
It was much more dynamic than that.
Yeah. This accessibility, this sharing of knowledge and art, that must like contributed to a more dynamic and like intellectually engaged society.
It did.
Think about like those public readings of the epics.
Yeah.
The Mahabharata and the Ramayana.
Right.
I can imagine families gathering to listen to these tales and like discussing the characters, debating the moral dilemmas and like internalizing the lessons embedded within those stories.
It was like a giant book club.
It is.
But with epic poems and philosophical debates instead of, you know, the latest bestseller.
Right.
Yeah.
I love that image of like knowledge being shared.
Yeah.
And debated so openly.
Yeah. It was very much a part of their world.
Was this just limited to adults?
No. Education was highly valued.
Okay.
Children, especially those from the higher castes, received instruction in grammar,
Oh,
literature,
right.
philosophy,
Wow.
and the arts.
The arts, too.
Oh, yeah. Imagine like young students memorizing verses from Kalidasa,
Wow.
debating philosophical concepts, and
Wow.
even participating in theatrical productions.
So it wasn't just about, like, rote learning.
No, not at all.
They were encouraged to, like, think critically and engage with, like, complex ideas and, like, express themselves creatively.
Yeah, it was a holistic approach to education.
That's pretty impressive for the time.
It was. And this emphasis on education, combined with this vibrant cultural scene we've been discussing, helped to create a society that valued intellectual curiosity, artistic expression, and the pursuit of knowledge.
It's incredible how this era managed to foster, like, such a dynamic intellectual and artistic environment.
It is a special time.
I'm curious, though, like, were there any downsides?
Well, that's a nuanced question.
To this, like, focus on Sanskrit literature.
Yeah.
Did it ever come at the expense of other forms of knowledge or expression?
That's something we can explore further.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true that the emphasis on Sanskrit, it definitely contributed to this flourishing literary tradition.
Right.
But it also had its limitations.
Okay.
Because Sanskrit was really primarily the language of the elite.
Okay.
You know, of scholars and priests and the ruling class.
So while there was this, like, public sharing of knowledge, it wasn't necessarily accessible to everyone.
Right.
Did the common people, those who didn't speak Sanskrit, have their own literary traditions?
It's a great point. While Sanskrit was dominant, it wasn't the only language.
Okay.
Regional languages and dialects flourished alongside Sanskrit. And they had their own oral storytelling traditions, folk songs, and even like early forms of regional literature.
Oh.
We don't have as much written documentation of these traditions, but we know that they played a vital role in shaping local cultures and identities.
So you have this, like, grand, formal literary tradition in Sanskrit.
Yeah.
And alongside it, you also have these, like, more localized, everyday forms of storytelling and artistic expression.
Yeah.
Did these two worlds ever intersect?
They did.
Was there, like, any cross-pollination between Sanskrit literature and those regional traditions?
There was definitely some exchange.
Oh.
Think about the epic Ramayana.
Yeah.
It likely originated in Sanskrit.
Okay.
But over time, it was adapted and retold in various regional languages, with each region adding, like, its own unique flavor and interpretations. This process of adaptation and reinterpretation, it really enriched both the Sanskrit original and the regional variations.
So it's this, like, cultural dialogue taking place with stories traveling across linguistic boundaries and evolving along the way.
Right, yeah.
But let's get back to, like, that potential downside that you're talking about.
Right.
Did this focus on Sanskrit ever come at the expense of other forms of knowledge?
It's a complex issue.
Okay.
While the Guptas, they promoted Sanskrit learning, they also supported other fields, mathematics, astronomy, medicine.
Oh, wow.
All of these saw advancements during this period.
So they weren't neglecting those in favor of just Sanskrit literature.
There's Aryabhata,
Okay.
a brilliant mathematician and astronomer, developed the concept of zero.
Whoa.
Calculated the approximate value of pi, and even proposed that the Earth rotates on its axis.
Wow, that's some serious scientific progress.
Yeah.
It sounds like this era was like a real melting pot of intellectual pursuits.
Yeah.
With Sanskrit literature being like a major ingredient.
Yeah.
But not the only one.
Exactly. And it's this multifaceted approach to knowledge, this willingness to explore different avenues of inquiry that contributed to the era's overall brilliance.
Right. I imagine, like, even with this this emphasis on education and knowledge, I imagine access to those opportunities varied depending on your social standing.
Absolutely.
Especially within the caste system.
Right. The caste system played a significant role
Yeah.
in shaping those social hierarchies and access to resources, including education.
Yeah.
While the Guptas didn't create the caste system, it was definitely entrenched during their rule.
Okay.
Those born into higher castes, particularly Brahmins, priests, and scholars, and Kshatriyas, warriors, and rulers, they had greater access
Right.
to education and opportunities to participate in this cultural flowering.
So while we see this, like, remarkable cultural output, it's important to remember
Yes.
that not everyone had the chance to, like, fully participate.
Yeah, it's true.
It adds a layer of complexity to, like, how we view this golden age.
It does. It's a reminder that even in periods of great achievement, social inequalities persist.
Yeah.
And access to opportunities isn't always equitable.
Right.
But even with those limitations, the Gupta era stands out for its intellectual dynamism, its artistic brilliance, and its ability to, like, blend these diverse strands of knowledge into this vibrant cultural tapestry.
It's clear that the Gupta era was, like, a pivotal period in Indian history.
It was.
Not just for its political achievements, but for this, like, incredible explosion of creativity and knowledge. But how did all of this impact later periods? Did this cultural energy just, like, fizzle out? Or did it leave a lasting legacy?
The legacy of the Gupta era, and particularly its contributions to Sanskrit literature, is really profound and far-reaching. Think about it. The works produced during this period, the epics, the plays, the poetry, the philosophical treatises, they weren't just confined to their own time. They were copied, studied, and transmitted across generations, becoming, like, foundational texts for Indian culture and thought.
So they weren't just, like, creating art for art's sake.
No.
They were shaping the cultural and intellectual landscape for centuries to come. Are there any, like, specific examples of how these works continue to influence later periods?
Take Kalidasa's play, Abhinashakuntalam. It wasn't just popular in the Gupta era, it continued to be performed and adapted throughout the centuries, inspiring countless artists and writers and even musicians. Really?
In the 18th century, it was even translated into English.
Wow.
And it became one of the first works of Indian literature to gain recognition in the West.
So this Gupta era play is still resonating with audiences today.
It is crossing cultural boundaries.
That's amazing.
Inspiring new interpretations.
That's remarkable staying power.
It is.
What about those, like, philosophical debates we were discussing? Did those have, like, a lasting impact?
Absolutely. The Vedanta school of philosophy, which saw, like, significant development during this era, continued to evolve and diversify, becoming one of the most influential schools of thought within Hinduism.
Wow.
Its ideas about the self, the nature of reality, and the path to liberation continue to be studied and debated by philosophers and theologians even today.
It's amazing how those ideas debated centuries ago still hold relevance today.
It speaks to, like, the enduring power.
It does.
These philosophical questions. And, like, the depth of thought that characterized the Gupta era.
Absolutely. And this intellectual legacy.
It
wasn't limited to India.
Oh, really?
The Gupta era was also a time of vibrant trade and cultural exchange with other parts of the world. Particularly Southeast Asia. So as Indian merchants and travelers ventured eastward, they carried with them not just goods, but also ideas, beliefs, and cultural practices, including those reflected in Sanskrit literature.
So this Gupta era influence, it wasn't just confined to India. It was spreading outward, shaping cultures, inspiring new artistic expressions in other parts of the world.
Exactly. Think about the magnificent temple complexes of Angkor Wat in Cambodia, built centuries after the Gupta era. They're a testament to the enduring influence of Indian art and architecture, carrying echoes of those Gupta era temples and sculptures we talked about earlier.
It's incredible to see how those artistic and cultural seeds planted during the Gupta era took root and blossomed in these new and unexpected ways across different cultures and time periods.
That's remarkable.
And this highlights, like, a crucial point. The Gupta era wasn't just, like, a moment frozen in time. It was, like, a dynamic force that shaped the cultural and intellectual landscape of India and beyond, leaving a legacy that continues to resonate today.
Absolutely. It's a powerful example of how ideas and artistic expressions can transcend time and place.
So we talked about how it wasn't just about these magnificent temples and sculptures.
Yeah.
It was really about an explosion of creativity that touched every aspect of life.
Right.
From the philosophical to the personal,
Yeah.
the religious to the artistic.
Right.
But before we wrap up our deep dive into this remarkable period,
Yeah.
I'm curious about one more thing.
Okay.
What would it have been like to actually live
Yeah.
in that world?
Mm-hmm.
If we were to travel back to the Gupta era,
Right.
what would it have felt like?
Yeah.
What sights, sounds, and smells would have filled the air?
Yeah.
What would have been like the joys and challenges of daily life?
Those are great questions,
Yeah.
and ones we can delve into right now. So imagine you're strolling through the bustling streets of a Gupta city.
Okay, I'm there.
It's just this vibrant tapestry of sights and sounds and smells.
Okay.
You're walking down a bustling market street, and merchants are hawking their wares.
Okay.
Silks from China.
Oh, wow.
Spices from the south. Gemstones from distant lands.
Wow.
The air is thick with the aroma of incense and spices, mingled with the earthy scent of like freshly tilled soil.
So it's very like a sensory overload.
Yeah.
But in a good way?
Yeah.
What about the people? What were they wearing?
Yeah, the crowds are just a mix of people from all walks of life.
Okay.
You'd see wealthy merchants in these fine cotton robes.
All right.
They brush shoulders with farmers in simple linen garments.
Yeah.
Women adorn themselves with jewelry.
Yeah.
Gold bangles, beaded necklaces, delicate earrings.
Wow, it sounds very cosmopolitan.
It was.
What languages?
Yeah, you
Should hear a medley of languages.
Okay.
Sanskrit being, of course, the language of scholarship and administration.
Right.
But also a variety of regional dialects.
Okay, so they would be speaking Sanskrit, but they'd also be speaking all these.
Yeah, and, as we've talked about, Sanskrit was primarily the language of the elite, so there were these other languages that people were speaking in their daily lives.
What about, we've talked about these, like grand temples and palaces.
What would it have been like to, actually visit one of those?
Yeah. Imagine approaching a towering temple with these just intricate carvings depicting scenes from mythology.
Wow.
And the air is resonating
Yeah.
with the chanting of priests
Yeah.
and the ringing of bells.
Okay.
And then inside these flickering oil lamps, they illuminate the faces of devotees, offering prayers and flowers to the deities.
So it's awe-inspiring, but also, peaceful.
Mm-hmm.
What about, festivals? Were there public gatherings that would brought people together?
We're a huge part of life.
Okay.
A time for celebration, community bonding, religious observance.
Okay.
So imagine processions with these elaborately decorated chariots, musicians playing traditional instruments, dancers moving gracefully to these rhythmic beats.
Okay.
And the streets are just illuminated with oil lamps.
So a very vibrant and joyous occasion?
It was.
But amidst all this grandeur?
Yeah.
What about the challenges people faced? What were some of the...
Yeah, life wasn't always easy, of course.
Right.
While the Gupta era was prosperous,
there
were still issues of poverty, disease, and social inequality for those in the lower castes. Life was particularly challenging, with limited opportunities and social mobility.
So just like today, there's this spectrum of experiences.
Yeah.
With some enjoying more privilege and comfort than others.
That's true.
But even with those, challenges, it sounds like the Gupta era was this time of, immense creativity and cultural vitality.
And this cultural richness. Yeah. It wasn't just confined to the cities.
Right.
Rural life was also infused with traditions, folklore, and artistic expressions. Imagine evenings filled with storytelling and folk songs and dances, connecting people to their history and their heritage.
So whether in, these bustling cities, these peaceful villages, the Gupta era offered this rich tapestry of experiences.
It was a rich and diverse society.
It's amazing to think that amidst, political stability and economic prosperity, they also managed to create, such a flourishing artistic and intellectual environment.
It was truly a remarkable period.
Yeah.
And as we've talked about, its legacy extends far beyond its own time, shaping Indian culture and thought for centuries to come. Their story reminds us that even in the ancient world, there were societies capable of great intellectual depth, artistic brilliance, and a deep appreciation for the beauty of the human experience.
It's been incredible exploring the Gupta era.
Yeah, it has.
And uncovering the forces that led to this flourishing of Sanskrit literature.
Right.
And its lasting impact.
Yeah, it's really, I think it gives us a lot to think about.
Yeah, it does. And it leaves us with a final thought-provoking question.
Okay.
As we're navigating, our own rapidly changing world. What lessons can we learn from the Gupta era?
Yeah.
About the power of creativity, the importance of knowledge, and the enduring legacy of human expression?
That is a wonderful question to ponder.
Yeah.
And it reminds us that we're not just inheritors of the past, but we're also creators of the future.
Right,
and by understanding the achievements and the challenges of those who came before us, we can perhaps gain some insights into shaping a future that embraces both knowledge and creativity.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of the Gupta era.
It was my pleasure.
We'll see you next time for another adventure into the depths of history.